Ever felt stuck in a cycle, trying to swap out those pesky habits? Enter Fume, your new best friend on this journey. And just to be clear, this isn't some mystical chant your artsy neighbor Jenna does during her moonlit yoga sessions. This is about a groundbreaking approach to habits. With Fume, it's all about embracing the good. Forget those electronic gadgets that promise the world and deliver little. Fume is grounded in nature. Imagine taking a deep breath of air, but it's flavored. And not just any flavor, but all natural, tantalizing ones that make you wonder why you didn't try it sooner. The design of Fume isn't just functional, it's therapeutic. With its adjustable airflow and interactive parts, it's more than just a device. It's a calming companion for those moments when life gets a tad overwhelming. And speaking of flavors, Fume's new cores are a sensory delight. The orange vanilla is nostalgia in a breath, reminiscent of sunlit picnics. Raspberry lemon? Think of a zesty summer afternoon in a meadow, and the sparkling grapefruit is like a refreshing morning splash. When I first got my hands on Fume, I was curious but cautious. The result? A delightful surprise. The flavors were richer than I imagined, and the device? It felt like a crafted piece of art, balanced, elegant, and oh so satisfying to hold. If you're looking for a sign to make a change, this is it. Fume isn't just a product, it's a movement. With a community of over 100,000 and growing, it's clear that Fume is onto something special. Ready to dive in? Head over to tryfume.com/DonovanDread. That's tryfum.com/DonovanDread and use the code DonovanDread for a cool 10% off the journey pack. In the grand scheme of things, it's not about giving up but moving forward. And with Fume, that journey looks a whole lot brighter. Join the movement and breathe the difference. I've got a tale for you. You might think I'm crazy, but I swear on my life, what I'm about to tell you is nothing but truth. A few years back, my son and I went on a camping trip to Yellowstone. It was the end of summer, and we wanted to grab onto the last strands of freedom and adventure before he returned to school. We arrived at our campsite early in the day, giving us plenty of time to set up. The sun was shining high in the sky, and it was pretty warm considering we were there late in the season. My son, Mikey, he's a good kid, always full of energy and excited to be outdoors. He wore a smile that lit up the day more than the sun, and he chattered nonstop about all the things we were going to do. Setting up the tent, Mikey couldn't stop running around our site, exploring every rock and tree in the place. Setting up camp with a kid definitely slows me down a bit, but I wouldn't have it any other way. He helped me with the tent, and then we went to start a fire. It was about dusk, but we finally got a good campfire going. The night was perfect. The flames snapping, and the smell of burning cedar floated around the air. I uncovered the grill while Mikey excitedly prepared the skewers with sausages and marshmallows, his two favorite food groups. As the sun began to set, I thought it would be a good time to tell him some old campfire stories that my father used to tell me. He huddled in his sleeping bag, eyes wide, hanging on to every word while the moonlight filtered through the trees around us. It was then we heard something strange. It was a deep growl coming from the woods that turned the blood in our veins to ice. I stopped mid-sentence to see if I could pinpoint its direction. The growl was unlike anything I'd experienced in my lifetime. It had pain and anger mixed into it, rumbling like thunder. It's difficult to explain, but it wasn't a normal wildlife sound. I can tell you that for sure. The sound echoed around us, like it came from everywhere yet nowhere at once. We huddled closer. The fire suddenly felt less protective, and the darkness around us a little more predatory. I grabbed the flashlight, hoping maybe it was a lost hiker or even a bear. Deep down, I knew this wasn't any creature of the wild. This was something sinister, and it turned out to be an encounter I was in no way prepared for. The growl sounded again, closer this time. I swear I felt it vibrate the ground beneath us. Then came the sound of snapping twigs and rustling leaves. It was closing in on us. Sharing a look with my son, I quickly expelled a breath, signaling him to stay silent, and switched off our flashlight. It was deathly quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy and pressing. The creature continued its vocalizations, and I wasn't sure if they were meant as warnings for us or if the creature was preoccupied with something else. What I can say for sure is that experience was enough terror for a lifetime. The campfire, our only barrier against the dangers of the darkness beyond our camp, flickered with sudden intensity and cast long shadows into the clearing. It was just beyond the reach of the flames that I finally saw the creature. A figure, hunched over but large. It looked to be covered in thick black fur, almost like a bear, but its shape was distinctly canine in nature. But it had a certain raw power that no domesticated dog did. It moved in slow, cautious steps towards us. As it neared, a blatantly unforgettable stench hit us. It was a mixture of sulfur and a foulness that I cannot even begin to explain. What got me most was its eyes. They looked red or maybe orange against the flames, as if the fire was burning within them. The animal looked at us, its gaze switching between me and Mikey, and held an uncanny sense of understanding. There was a human quality to it that I can't explain. The creature howled. It was a disturbing and melancholy sound. It was like dozens of people crying out all at once. I can't explain it. A chill ran down my spine, and I held on to Mikey more tightly. Then, as abruptly as the best had appeared, it turned around and disappeared into the darkness once again. Unsurprisingly, me and Mikey didn't sleep much that night. We stayed close, listening to the quiet woods around us, half expecting the creature to appear again from the shadows. As the sun rose, we found trails around our campsite, seared grass, and places where the dirt had turned to blackened glass. Was the creature we had seen the night before some kind of demon? I didn't have answers, but the signs we saw on the ground were proof that what we encountered wasn't something out of our imaginations. As we packed up to leave, we talked about what had happened. Mikey was certain we had experienced a paranormal encounter. He was fascinated, despite the underlying fear. And me, well, who knows? I just wanted to get us out of there and home safely. But I do know that there is certainly more than meets the eye out there. I don't think that creature was from this earth. I can tell you that much. Whatever its reasons for being out there that night, they clearly weren't to do with us. As frightening as the creature was, it didn't try to harm us, and I believe it could easily have done so if it wanted. That's my only consolation. That even if these things are out there, well, hopefully they'll just leave us be as long as we leave them be. I wanted to share with you something strange and fascinating I came across while working my night shift as a guard at Area 51. Yeah, the Area 51. I know all the rumors and I've heard all the stories. Really, on most nights, it's just like any other job. But things took quite an unexpected turn for me one day. I suppose it was just a matter of time, given the history of the place. It all began on one of my routine rounds in the restricted section. You need a lot of clearance to get in there, but as I had been there longer than most graduates have been alive, I think they just figured I'd seen it already, but I digress. Back to the story. So, a few nights ago, during my rounds, I noticed something odd. An old battered journal sticking out from underneath a stack of classified documents. My job is to keep things safe and secure, not snooping around, but I won't lie. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to take a peek. Retreating to the security booth, I opened the cover, half expecting to set off some alarm or trigger some super secret lockdown protocol. But thankfully and surprisingly, the alarm slept on around me, and I found myself peering into the past. The journal was filled with detailed entries of what appeared to be classified operations and experiments. Now, wild speculations about UFOs and little green men invading Earth are quite common around here. But what I was seeing here was totally off the wall. These entries were about, well, it's hard to describe. I guess you could say they were about superheroes, but not the kind you find in comic books. These were about non-human creatures, possibly of extraterrestrial origin, who had allegedly been working behind the scenes to ensure our planet's survival. The entries didn't share any specific descriptions about what these beings looked like. They were just vague words and phrases with some sort of code that, for the life of me, I couldn't work out. It was almost like the entries were deliberately written to obscure the true nature of these beings. But their actions, that's where things really got interesting. Going through the entries, I was engrossed, reading tales of cataclysmic events, from near-Earth asteroids to devastating plagues, things that could have wiped us out. Only they didn't, thanks to these superhero creatures. If you ask me, it all sounded like well-woven science fiction. But then again, a decade ago, I would have dismissed the mere existence of a place like Area 51. Yet here I am. As you can imagine, I was captivated by this revelation. The journal entries ended abruptly. There were many pages left blank. I could only guess the author, whoever they were, stopped recording these events. By the time I looked back up from the journal, I noticed my shift was nearly over, with morning light creeping over the horizon. I knew I had to get the journal back to where I'd found it, but its secrets refused to let me go. I slipped it back underneath the stack of classified files, praying no one would notice that it had been relocated. Maybe it was harmless curiosity, but maybe it was a grave breach of security protocol. But once you have seen the unseen, you cannot unsee it. Days turned into nights and back into days. Despite the mundane routines of my job, my mind teetered between curiosity and fear. It was like I was carrying around an invisible ticking time bomb, one that could alter everything we presume we know about the world and beyond. The more I thought about it, the more I started to spot oddities, tiny irregularities that I would have otherwise missed. Things like strange electrical disturbances, unusual movements on the radar near the restricted section, or satellite imagery that held these unexplainable blips. There were signs that these celestial superheroes might be coming back, or maybe they never really left. But before I could delve deeper, my activities were interrupted. One day, I found my security access to certain areas inexplicably revoked, files disappearing, and new faces appearing to scrutinize routine operations, practically breathing down our necks. It was like someone was trying to hide something, perhaps resonance of the very secrets I had accidentally stumbled upon. Or maybe I was just being paranoid, seeing things that weren't there, creating threads of connections to justify a spellbinding tale of extraterrestrial saviors. I had to stay silent to keep my job, even though it made me question everything that I had ever known to be real. I was merely a pawn in a high-stakes game of cosmic chess. In the shadows, I became an observer again, watching, listening, recording evidence of our imminent silent watchers. Maybe they are benevolent, safeguarding us from invisible, astral threats. Or maybe they are just observing. It's weird, isn't it? And so here I am, stuck between a life where knowing too much and knowing too little are both equally dangerous. But for now, at least, the world remains oblivious. Now, every time I gaze upwards into the night sky, I can't help but wonder, are we alone? Or are there unseen watchers amongst the stars? If these celestial superheroes were here before, perhaps they still are, watching, waiting, ready to move when needed. A couple of years ago, around spring, a few of my friends decided on a whim to go for a hike in the Arizona desert. I'm game for anything outdoors, and this dry, arid landscape was a welcoming change for us, as we were all normally used to Ohio's green forests and meandering rivers. Hiking and camping adventures were pretty normal for our group, but we didn't normally travel this far. We were in unfamiliar territory, and, as we were about to find out, there are things out there in the desert that are better left alone. There were 5 of us all packed into one SUV. The trip began with us driving for hours, laughing and arguing about the music playlist, and we finally stopped near a spot that our buddy Chip said was really cool. Chip was the only one of us who had been to the Southwest before. It was the first time I'd seen such a different side of the US. The dry expanse of desert, the sparse vegetation, and the ruddy, sun-touched mountains in the distance felt like a completely new world. The hike was pretty easy at first, but that didn't last for long. Suddenly, the terrain started getting real steep. We were beginning to scale this rocky outcrop that supposedly led to one of those fantastic panoramic overlooks, where you feel like you could see the whole desert. But something made us stop in our tracks. Chip had found something odd on the ground. It was a small, clay pot-like object partially buried in the dirt, just off the trail. It looked like the ancient Native American artifacts you would find in a museum. We chuckled about it, and someone even said we should take it with us. But Chip was hesitant. He had worked out here for a few years building roads and told us that some things shouldn't be messed with. I wouldn't say I'm superstitious, but after Chip picked up that artifact, we all felt a strange, eerie sensation. It was like a feeling of being watched from somewhere unseen. Chip set the pot back on the ground where he found it, and we moved on. We laughed it off, thinking the isolation and scorching sun were probably getting to our heads. But it only gets stranger from there. We were almost at the top of the outcrop, and as we were struggling to clamber over the last few feet, our uneasiness had grown substantially. And let me tell you, it had nothing to do with the rock climbing or the heights. There was something strange going on, though none of us knew it at the time. Then, suddenly, Luke, who was bringing up the rear, mumbled something. We turned to see him staring at something behind us. All the color drained from his face. We all saw it then. There was a figure in the distance. It was too far away to make out any features, but the shape was unmistakably human. It was tall but unnaturally slender and agile. We could tell it was watching us. Suddenly, a bone-chilling howl echoed from behind, making us jump. It sounded like a coyote, but there was something off about it. Something just not right. It was deeper, almost human-sounding. It was a moment before we realized the howl was coming from the figure. The thing in front of us took a step forward, its form shifting and dissolving into a mass of fur and feathers, before it finally morphed into the shape of a coyote. Our light-hearted banter was replaced with palpable fear, and we began to descend the rocky outcrop in haste. As we scrambled down, glancing back frequently, the shapeshifter seemed to shadow us, but it always maintained some distance. Even if this thing was a supernatural creature, and it wasn't just our eyes playing tricks on us in the evening light, what did it want? Why was it chasing such a large group? Wild animals won't go after a group. It's too dangerous for them. And yet, this thing was pursuing us like it was hunting. Luke tripped and fell on the way down, letting out a cry as he scraped his knee, and in response, a mimic of his own cry echoed from behind us from the creature. I don't think I can accurately explain our fear in that moment. This thing wasn't just hunting us, it was toying with us. We somehow managed to make it back to the trail and the safety of the SUV. Most of us were desperately trying to convince ourselves it was all a hallucination brought on by the relentless sun. But we had all seen it, and it was very, very real, even if we didn't want to admit it to ourselves. I'm pretty sure I saw it standing tall against the horizon as we sped away from the desert and headed towards our hotel in the city. I wasn't much of a city boy myself, but those bright lights and relentless commotion were welcome that night. I remember the whole drive back was silent with fear and disbelief. We didn't need to discuss what had happened. Living through it was dreadful enough. Later, in the following days, we tried to make sense of our encounter, each of us grappling with our own perception of reality. It left us questioning a lot of our previous adventures and the times we spent in the forest together. Were these things everywhere? Or was it something confined to the deserts of the Southwest? I can't say for sure, but I know I haven't been at ease in the great outdoors since that day. I'm always looking around to make sure there aren't monsters lurking in the shadows. I almost wish I didn't know those things were out there in the flesh, but living in ignorance has its own dangers, I suppose. We have this tradition in our group of friends, where for every person's birthday each year, they get to choose an adventurous activity for the group. You know, things like cave diving, bungee jumping, even skydiving. Whatever it was, it couldn't be something boring. That was the deal. Other than that, it was anything goes. Well, this year, in honor of my 25th birthday, I thought I'd spice things up by dragging my buddies to an abandoned asylum in New York State in the middle of the night. I always like going to those haunted houses and hayrides around Halloween, so I figured let's try the real deal. It was one of those massive early 20th century structures, all grimy marble, rusty iron, peeling paint, and a history too awful to forget. My friends thought it was an odd request, but they decided to humor me, because it was my birthday after all. My buddy Tim was the most skeptical of us, always the practical one, but you'd never find anyone more loyal. So armed with flashlights, GoPros, and a case of beer, we set off on our adventure. We reached the asylum around midnight. Maybe it was the ghost stories we had all heard about the place, or the very real imposing structure under the ghostly moonlight. But we all felt an indescribable unease as we approached the entrance. The interior was an eerie sight. Crumbled plaster from the ceilings littered the floors. Wallpaper peeled in long, gouging stripes, revealing the damp-stricken brickwork underneath. We walked through the dusty corridors, our footfalls the only sounds punctuating the eerie silence. The thrill of exploring such a place replaced our previous unease for a moment. It wasn't long before things would get interesting. We discovered a crumbling office with a decaying ledger book on the desk in the center of the room. There were entries dating back to the 1930s, notes about patients, medications, symptoms, all eerily fascinating. It was like they just abandoned everything and left it all to rot. No attempt to move out or clean up the place. We felt like detectives uncovering ancient mysteries as one particular entry caught our eyes. It mentioned a Harry Pemberley, admitted for acute psychosis, with a series of notes detailing his deteriorating condition. His file mentioned of violent tendencies and an obsession with fire. Harry sounded like a pretty interesting, albeit disturbed, patient. Flipping to the last page, we found a harrowing entry. December 13th, tragedy strikes. Harry found dead, scalded in boiler room. Incident under investigation. We exchanged wide-eyed glances. A chill suddenly rushed over us. Despite our unease, we decided to trudge on. However, we couldn't have anticipated what happened next. We found the basement door slightly ajar. A rusty sign hung loosely by a single screw in red boiler room. An inexplicable smell of decay wafted out, and, if I didn't know better, I'd say was tinged with the metallic smell of blood. We knew going down there might not be the best idea, but hell, we had come this far. As we made our way into the basement, our flashlights cast longer, deeper shadows in the empty room. We couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. Suddenly, the cold stench of dread had us in its tight grip. But we had yet to find the true nature of the horror that awaited us down below. We had barely made it down the rusted iron steps when Kevin suddenly let out a yelp. He claimed he felt a cold breeze like a sudden winter gust. It didn't make sense. None of the others felt it. Then I heard a dry, crackling sound from a corner of the room, like the rustling of paper. Then came something straight out of a horror movie. A thick fog began to gather around us, and a silhouette appeared, simply out of nothing. In a state of shock and fascination, we watched this humanoid shape take form. It was translucent, an unfocused blend of gray mist. It hovered, making slow, almost graceful movements through the room. Our hearts pounded in our chests as the silhouette started taking on a more definitive form, resembling a man in a mid-century asylum uniform. There was a hollow quality about its eyes. The face was pale, barely holding on to the visage of a living man. A soft groan echoed around the room. The ghostly figure moved towards a cold, rusty furnace. It reached out transparent hands, miming the act of loading coal. We held our breaths as it then recoiled violently, acting as if being burnt horribly. The realization hit us like a ton of bricks. This was no mere spectral visitation. We were witnessing the final memories of Harry Pemberley play out before our eyes. It was like he was stuck there reliving his death over and over again. Awestruck, intrigued, and horrified, we watched as this spectral replay faded. Its figure seemed to dwindle and vanish before turning into a mist-like formation, and finally, completely disappearing. The tension was broken when Connor, pale as a ghost himself, murmured, "We need to get the hell out of here." I couldn't disagree. With unsteady legs, we made our way out of the basement, out of the asylum, and back into the safety of our car, not stopping until we reached the familiarity of our local pub. We spent the remainder of the night huddled in a corner booth, nursing our beers and recounting the night's events. We realized that we had just witnessed something most people only talk about in hushed whispers, a grim spectacle from beyond the grave. But the thought that stuck with me was that Harry was still there, forever experiencing the agony of his death. As dawn approached, Harry's plight filled me with a strange mixture of terror and empathy. Was he trying to communicate his tragic end to us? Nevertheless, we were curious, fascinated by the tantalizing possibility of solving this historical mystery. Perhaps in doing so, I thought we could assist Harry in breaking free of his torment, and find out why exactly he ended up in the asylum in the first place, and if he actually deserved to be there or not. My friends didn't share my sentiment. They wanted nothing more to do with the place, but I've been digging a little deeper. I've yet to go back to the asylum myself, but when I do, I hope to find a way to help that tortured soul move on. It was a Saturday night, sometime around late June if my memory serves. I had decided to blow off some steam with a couple of mates and hit up an underground rave. Now, I'm not usually one for all-night parties, but my friends had been hyping up this event for a while. It was going to be hosted in an abandoned subway station. That got me intrigued, and I figured, why not? In hindsight, it wasn't my best choice. The atmosphere of the underground, the loud music echoing off the subway tiles, that pulsing, resonating bass, it was all very enticing in a way it's hard to put into words. We arrived at the venue, and I was instantly embraced by the chaos. A horde of people appeared out of nowhere, pouring into the entryway of the subway station. There were so many people that it was hard to recognize them as such. They moved around like a swarm of locusts. The barely audible murmurs of conversations mixed with distant beats of the music created an almost palpable sense of anticipation in the air. As we descended further underground, the air became cooler, damper, and filled with the unique smell of cold concrete and stale air. Suddenly, a sulfuric, rotten smell wafted into the air. I sort of rolled my eyes then, figuring this is what I got for going to a party in an abandoned subway. It's not like this place was exactly clean. In fact, I'm pretty sure the organizers didn't even have permission to be there. The party was in full swing when I got there. The flickering neon lights danced with the shadows of the underground. It was surreal in a way. The music was a throbbing beast of electronic beats, with the DJ standing as its conductor. It echoed around the cavernous space, making the ground vibrate under the pulsating rhythm. I wondered if the people above ground could hear it too. My friends and I joined the crowd. The energy of the dance floor was infectious. The smell of sweat and alcohol dominated the space. It was nauseating, but we were having too much fun to care. These kind of parties, they were like stepping into an alternate universe where the normal rules of society were ignored. Between dancing, laughing, and trying to keep up with everyone else, the first hours of the party passed in a blur. But as the night wore on, the initial thrill gradually began to fade and was replaced by a vague unease. I was unsure of what triggered it, but a sudden chill ran down my spine, and the music seemed to distort in a way that was impossible for me to understand. It was almost like I was drugged. The atmosphere, once electrifying, gave off an uncanny vibe, like the ground beneath us was shifting. It started subtly. There was an odd noise over the music that sounded like a growl. It would happen periodically, and we all just brushed it off as technical difficulties with the sound system. We were in an underground structure after all. But then there were these soft whispers echoing through the tunnels. They seemed to be speaking in different languages, but no one could hear them well enough to figure out what was happening. The temperature dropped suddenly, turning the damp chill into a bone-biting cold, even with the warmth of the crowd. Then I saw it. There was a darkness coiled around one corner of the station. It was a shadow darker than the night. There seemed to be an electrical charge in the air around it. It contorted and twisted, and I could sense the eyes on me. They burned, a vivid, piercing red. My body froze. A figure slowly emerged from the inky blackness. I saw a glimpse of horns in the swirling mess around it. The shadows concealed its full form, but those eyes, those burning red eyes stared out from the dark. A foul reek like sulfur and burnt flesh washed over me, making my stomach churn. Everyone had stopped dancing to watch the entity. It seemed to suddenly grow a face, but then the face shifted and morphed into what I can only describe as a demon. It was like nothing I had ever fathomed existed. Fear surged through my body, turning my blood to ice and freezing me to the spot. The silence snapped when a gut-wrenching scream pierced through the air. Panic immediately ensued. Friends, acquaintances, strangers, everyone was running, and I joined the mass exodus towards the surface. That thing in the shadows, the demon, it laughed at us. It was a horrifying sound like dozens of snakes hissing. I did not stop running until I burst into the open air above the subway. My ears were ringing, but that laughter was still echoing in my brain. The subway, the people, the music, they all disappeared into the night. We didn't talk about it. Maybe we were too horrified. Maybe we didn't believe what happened. Maybe we were all just in denial. But every time I close my eyes, I see those red glowing irises and hear the sound of its laughter. Underground raves no longer seem appealing to me, and every dark corner sends me into a panic. I realize now, more than ever, there are unknown things in this world that I'd prefer to keep unknown.